Richard Pyatt. Welcome back. It's the Pest Prospectives from the Pest Pros of Michigan. And if you've clicked on this one, it's because it says the top 5 pests that pose health risks. Yeah, let's talk about that. Knowledge is power, right? Amber Byers is back with us, Associate Certified Entomologist and Director of Field Operations with the Pest Pros of Michigan. Hello, Amber.
Hey, Richard.
All right, let's have it. Let's start off with the first of our top 5 pests that pose health risks. And this one is very familiar, mosquitoes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of bundle mosquitoes with like flea and ticks as well, because they're all coming from pretty much that same area, the harborage areas, the vegetation. They like being in overgrown, shady areas that have a lot of water issues or standing water nearby. So we start off with mosquitoes, especially here where we're at in Kalamazoo. We're very familiar with some of the diseases they can transmit, because a few years ago, we were all impacted by the triple E outbreak, the Eastern equine encephalitis, which is contracted from birds who have it. And then mosquitoes can then infect people or horses through the bite. And that's no fun. It causes like flu-like symptoms. It can cause inflammation of the brain. And then if we're moving right on to ticks, ticks have the Lyme disease. And I always think of my puppy, who's a full-grown dog, but all dogs are puppies, right? So I think of her because she loves going out and foraging through the woods when we're out visiting my sister, when we're on walks through the woods. And so, ticks will climb up those little blades of grass and just wait for a host to walk by and attach right to them. And ticks with Lyme disease will spread through human contact.
Yeah, they're great hitchhikers.
They are, absolutely. I was just out at my sister's this past weekend, and she was telling me, like, whenever 11 goes into the, tree line, make sure you check her. And sure enough, the next time she came out, I was looking at her and she had a young tick on her. So Lyme disease is no joke, and people should definitely be aware of it and be checking their animals and maybe getting them on a preventative treatment through their vet. That's what I do. I have my dog on a monthly plan. And it works for fleas and ticks and heartworm, which again is contracted through mosquito bites.
Sure.
Actually.
And I suppose it's worth mentioning that, of course, not every mosquito has a disease, not every tick has a disease, but these potential threats are out there. So it's important to safeguard against them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we've all been bitten by a mosquito, and not all of us contracted the crazy stuff that they can pass. So yeah, it's definitely worth noting that if you do get bit or come into contact with one of these pests, that it's not the end of the world. But yeah, just to be aware that it is something that can happen. Absolutely.
Yeah. And another one that the mosquitoes carry is West Nile, of course, which is quite serious.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Same thing going on there with the flu-like symptoms, and you just feel real bad if you get those.
Yeah. So when you talk about these kinds of, I guess what I'd call warm weather pests, I say that because that tends to be their busy season, right? What kinds of approaches does Pest Pros undertake to try and mitigate the amount of these around? I mean,
Yeah.
I see that you can have a treatment for these kinds of pests, right?
Yeah, great question. And you did mention like warm weather pests. Funnily enough, ticks will survive all winter and will be active on warmer days throughout the winter season. We love to get proactive with our tick treatments. Like right before the season kicks off, we're always shouting out to our clients, who wants to get on a proactive treatment, because we can do some granular spreading through the lawn to get to the younger ticks. We can do some treatment for rodents and attack the ticks at their first instar stage before they even are interested in the larger rodents, dogs, humans, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we would also do for mosquitoes, larviciding, because we're trying to break that life cycle before it gets to the point where it's going to be effective for us, right?
I think there's probably a perception, right, that, well, mosquitoes are flying in from all over the place. How can I secure my own yard from them? But I think what you're talking about really helps repel them and get rid of them, doesn't it?
Yeah, and one of the new materials that they have available right now, there's a few different brands, but the one that we use, it's called Into Care, and it's a bucket and it holds water, and the water has a larvicide in it
Uh,
and an adulticide. I think we might have touched on this in one of our other talks, but it is more of a environmentally friendly product, and it covers a larger zone than a treatment of liquid pesticides would.
I see. And
That's
of
really
course, standing water, mosquitoes love that. So they'll come right to it, won't they?
absolutely, they need it to breed. That's where they lay their eggs. Floodwater mosquitoes will lay their eggs in areas where water will come, but container breeding mosquitoes are always going to look for standing water to land on and lay their eggs in.
All right. So there you are in the first of our list of pests that pose health risks: mosquitoes, fleas, ticks. Guess what? Next, rodents.
Yeah. Rodents are some people's biggest fear, you know? People just don't like to see mice or rats, which is funny because certain people are okay with them. I'm not okay with spiders, but I can mess with mice all day long, you know?
You have the strength. So
Yes.
glad somebody does. That's right.
Yes, and this was a very real situation with the diseases that can be transmitted through rodent droppings and rodent urine. Gene Hackman just died. He's a celebrity, a famous actor who just died. So very real. 2025, people are still being affected by this.
And this is something that, in the case of his wife, I think they were not aware. It seems, anyway, they were not aware. In fact, it's interesting you bring this up because I just read this article yesterday that, of course, there were rodents found on some of their property, and this was the risk that they were taking, but probably didn't know it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the other scary part. And so that's why we put such a heavy emphasis on the sanitation and remediation part of our service, because we can do the control, absolutely, and we can get rid of the mice. But what do they leave behind? They leave behind all the things that cause threat, the rodent droppings, the urine, all the trailing that has the pheromones that could potentially bring new rodents in. If we get rid of that, then that risk goes down.
And if you look at the list of potential ailments that come from what you're talking about, mice, rats, salmonella, the hantavirus you referred to, other pathogens as well, where does this happen? If they're in your home, they're probably going where the food is, right?
Yeah, and so you don't think about this because mice are usually moving around when you're sleeping, when you're not at home, when things are quiet. And so they're traveling on your countertops, on the dishes that were maybe left out, on places where you're not going to see it because it's so microscopic, but that they leave behind those things that could transmit the disease. And so you
Mhm.
pick up that plate that you left out, a mouse may have, done some business on there, and you use that plate. You don't know. You can't see it all the time. So kitchens, pantries, things like that.
Yeah, boy, not a pleasant thought to think about, but
No.
this happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's not the fun part of the conversation, and you never want to sell based out of fear, but this is the reality. And sometimes, without educating somebody, they'll never know that.
Yeah. All right. What about wildlife? That's next on our list. What do we consider wildlife in this case?
Well, the two that came to mind for me were bats and raccoons. We deal with a lot of raccoon latrines. Latrines is a fancy word for their toilet where they use the bathroom. And raccoon latrines can get pretty large, and the size of their droppings is almost like a medium-sized dog. So it's not hard to miss, but the amount of disease that can be associated with that is very high. And so you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. We get the question a lot, well, can I just do this myself? You absolutely can, but please heed the risks of contacting this without the proper PPE. We always let clients know the risk of not getting it done by a professional.
Yes, and PPE, of course, is the professional grade apparel that you need to wear, protective equipment that you need to wear when dealing with all of this. Really, when we talk about raccoons and bats, and you referred to the droppings, this dries out and it becomes dust, right? We can breathe that.
Yeah, yeah, great point. That is one of the things that is such a high risk with bat guano because it can get airborne. Their guano is so small and it's just made of like particles from insects, that were digested and then released. And so once it gets into the air from being disturbed somehow, whether it's from somebody working in that area or another animal disturbing it, you breathe that in, and that's how you're gonna, be affected by that.
And you may not
The
even know.
yeah, and histoplasmosis is the number one thing that we see bats, the inhalation of the guano from bats.
Yeah.
And then rabies from the bites. But I haven't personally experienced any, true stories with that in my career yet, but I do know that it is possible. I haven't encountered anybody personally that's had that happen to them, but
Well, that's the thing I think people think about. When they think about bats, they think about rabies. What you're saying
yeah.
is it really is the guano and the airborne contaminants that we could breathe when there's enough of it.
Yeah, because there's the stereotypical, oh, the bat's gonna get in my hair and the bats are gonna, fly around my head. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't hear about that too much.
Right. That's not the real issue.
Yeah.
Okay. And finally, after we've talked about bugs and wildlife, there is bed bugs, right? Are they actually a health risk?
Bedbugs don't pose a risk as far as spreading diseases, but they cause a lot of mental stress, right? Anxiety, insomnia, just mental issues, like if you're dealing with bedbugs, and we've encountered hundreds to thousands of clients that have dealt with bedbugs, it's something that once you have them and have experienced it, they don't forget that, they think every little speck is a bedbug. It's hard for them to sleep. It's hard for them to, carry on with the day because everything that they see is in their mind a bed bug. And so if you can imagine dealing with that all day, every day, how your health could be affected, absolutely.
My goodness, I really hadn't thought of that. The idea that once you know you've dealt with bed bugs, it's a little bit of a leap of faith for an average person, right? To say, okay, I guess they're gone now. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
And you have to get yourself back into that frame of mind, and that can be tough.
Yeah, especially once you learn how people get bed bugs, it's just something that could happen to literally anybody. They're hitchhiker bugs. They hitchhike off of stored items. They can hitchhike off of public transportation, public places, churches. So it's very hard to know all of that
Yeah.
and then move forward once you've already dealt with them.
That's incredible. And you really touch on the sensitivity of that because we might think, we'll pick up bed bugs staying as a guest somewhere else, but just in normal travels, it can even happen. And then the notion of the mental stress that takes place after you've encountered that is notable. I would just add here that a number of the things that we've talked about today, rodents, wildlife, bed bugs in particular, we've done separate episodes on how the Pest Pros of Michigan handle those situations. Rodents, of course, are a very serious situation, and bats and raccoons and bed bugs. All of those situations require an approach that the Pest Pros of Michigan have talked about in some of our Pest Prospective episodes. So we invite you to subscribe to those and find those episodes, and you'll be able to hear in more detail about that. But here we are, really 5 of the most prominent pests that pose health risks. This has been enlightening, Amber. I'm not sure folks realize that this is a threat sometimes. And so this is good to know. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Amber Byers, one of the Pest Pros of Michigan on Pest Prospectives.